This was really based on my own journey where I've been in sexual recovery since 1986. That was in group work. I suppose I was first introduced through a Canadian, I think it's originally from Nova Scotia, in 1983. And in terms of 12 steps S recovery, I've been in 3 different programs. And what I like about SLAA is its breadth, and especially the way it covers the anorexia part as well, because a lot of the work that I've had to do after having had 8 years of sobriety and then losing it and knowing it was coming to an end and feeling powerless to stop it, was developing a relationship with my own body. And that really sums up the nature of my work and the work I do with others. My journey sort of back to sobriety and recovery was I got desperate and went to the US to do some workshops, and while attending some meetings, I just heard from other members about the fact, this was in Los Angeles, that they were getting various forms of brain testing to actually see what was going on in their brain, rather than just guessing or getting other people's opinions. And what I heard was surprising, and I came back, got mine brain scanned and or a test, very basic one at that stage, but it said it was highly dysregulated. This is like 15 years ago. And while at one sense I had no idea what that meant, emotionally I knew what it meant, that everything in life had been hard, from school, work, family, relationships, and including recovery. And getting any sobriety was like through gritted teeth. And so I got introduced to innovative treatments, and my brain health improved. To give you an idea of where I was at, my attention level at the time when it was measured population-wide against my age group, I was in the bottom 11th percentile, which means 11th from the bottom of the class out of 100. And it was only because I'd had some sort of intelligence that I was able to get any sort of recovery. And so it really, anyway, starting to get into innovative treatments, it was a long journey, because initially I could only do in-centre treatments because I could not organise myself well enough to do stuff at home and whatever. And then I started walking this journey with others. I sat in with a member who got their brain scan results and discovered a brain injury that they didn't know they'd had. And again, all they'd been told was, you've got to really want recovery, you just got to commit to sobriety, you just got to work the steps and everything will be fine. And then around that time, I got to go to Akron, Ohio. I got introduced to some of the AA history, and it was really researching a lot of the AA history that I got to see that there's a whole part of that we don't know about. And it starts off with the doctor's opinion in the AA Big Book, where it says any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. And again, from that chapter, which is the very first section of the AA Big Book, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he then has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. And then further on, it says, of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from this physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. And further investigation of AA history, and I've got all this within the workshop, all these quotes and references, that I discovered that prior hospitalisation was assumed in early AA. It wasn't just people coming straight in. And, I discovered all the characters, like a bit more about Dr. Silkworth, Sister Ignatia, what happened in those early hospital treatments. Sister Ignatia is considered the angel of AA. The story was that
drunks newly admitted to the hospital were given vitamin C and a membership to AA.
And this is enormous. And then my sponsor's a triple winner in 3 different programs, so he gave me a perspective. Gamblers Anonymous, and they've got essentially a doctor's opinion chapter. Again, this is all in my workshop. Adult Children and Alcoholics have got a doctor's opinion chapter. But the most recent one is done by Marijuana Anonymous in 2015, and it's the most up-to-date of all of them, sort of really describing addiction as a complex brain disorder. It talks about genetics, it talks about brain injury. It's an enormous, it's very broad in terms of talking about the contributing factors. So all along the way, I've been sharing this information with others. I think there's been about 10 members I've known who've gone to get various brain tests, and they've discovered everything from brain injuries they didn't know they had, toxic brains, which could have come from a wide range of sources. A couple have discovered that they're somewhere on the autism spectrum. And as this started to be incorporated in their recovery, then they found that recovery was less frustrating and more holistic. And it came back to that basic AA principle that I heard of, which is threefold recovery, that recovery is physical, emotional and spiritual. And that physical part seems to have gotten lost in history. So I'm known for actually being able to keep it quite brief, but that's the brief sort of summary of the people I work with. And I'll post a link to the workshop that goes through this in more detail.
The web address is step-1.com.
If anyone's got any questions or comments.
Well, I will kick off with the toughest question, which is, why is your workshop controversial?
It's something new. And from what I've seen is when anorexia had to fight to make its way into SLAA, How had to fight to make its way into SLAA. And as soon as you do something new, you know, it challenges the old order. And one of the things I've discovered, I mean, in the workshop, there's a lot of outside references, even though it's all very strongly based on AA history. It uses science to back up the modern relevance of that. And most of these innovative doctors who've led the way in offering new hope to people with addictions have faced exactly the same opposition, that they're challenging the standard paradigm, and that often existing doctors, and I think this applies to existing members, have been repeating stories for years. And what I'm suggesting, there's actually threefold recovery, not twofold, emotional and spiritual, or it's all spiritual. Sometimes it's even reduced to. And I think that's part of the reason is there's a cognitive dissonance that people have to work through about this, you know, what they've said to members, what they've said to themselves, what they've seen over the years, and maybe didn't have an answer for.
Right. I think we've all heard the truism that this addiction is a spiritual malady, and we are not doctors, we are not counsellors. What is the line that we walk when we support people to seek outside help? Do you have any recommendations for us?
Well, I'll go back to early AA, and obviously this was before the traditions, but Dr. Bob in the AA Big Book, it says, it's got a little asterisk footnote that says, during his years of sobriety, he helped without charge 5,000 alcoholics with medical assistance. And I worked that out. That was one for every day of his sobriety, essentially. So there has been this crossover where, you know, but it's been about handing it over to medicals, and everything I do is about pointing people towards the appropriate medical resources. And to me, that's fundamentally what AA was doing from the very beginning.
Right. Would it be true to say that all you do in your meetings and workshops is, as members, share your experience, strength and hope, how to recover from sex and love addiction?
Oh, it's fundamentally about that and how it all ties in. So, some of the meeting topic sheets which are on the website, we will talk about, they will have a bit of science, but there's a bit of literature usually alongside it to show the relevance. And so and as we say on the site, and this is by group conscience of the group, that the use of outside literature is there to complement our understanding of the conference literature, not to replace it.
Are you affiliated with any particular treatment modality?
No.
Right.
And usually when I point people towards resources, I try to give them a range to choose from. So it's not my doctor or my clinic. For instance, here in Melbourne, I went to one particular brain clinic, but I mentioned the range of them in Melbourne when people, want to look at those options.
Right. What's the position of your meetings and workshops on giving advice versus feedback?
Okay, and look, when I did the workshop online, and this is recorded, someone said, asked me, would you recommend, getting your amalgam fillings out? And I said, I'm not a doctor. I can tell you that I got mine replaced because they're mercury fillings, but that's just my experience. So that's where I draw the line.
So I don't know do people seek out these kinds of diagnoses later in life? And like you mentioned brain clinic, but I don't know a lot about it. I guess maybe if you know some.
We've got a regular member who was diagnosed on the spectrum at 63. Another member I met up with yesterday who identified at around 50. And I may be, my therapist says, look, there'd be people who could, even with all my treatment, could still class me as being on the spectrum. But if I was my young self now, I would definitely be put on the spectrum, labels on the spectrum. And I'm not a big one for labels because the word autism is a made-up concept and I take the idea of inventory at the physical level, and a lot of this is about linking the physical with the emotional and spiritual. And so I can send these through. I often refer people to sort of some free assessments that help get a bit of an idea of what's going on in their brain. And because these look at brain functions, it doesn't necessarily go to labels, because I think labels can be little prisons. Autism spectrum covers everything from incontinent, non-speaking to, a high-powered executive. I mean, that's how ridiculous that label has become. Whereas knowing, and again, this is the inventory work, I have short-term memory problems. I have sensitivities to particular light, noise. Like yesterday, I was with a couple of members and we were meeting with another person who's interested in all the biological improvement stuff. And after 2 hours of a bunch of people, that's 2.5 hours, that was too much for me. I can do 2.5 hours with one person, but not with a bunch of people. And someone else had the same experience. And some of the members have had this sensitivity to noise and light. And I've had some of that, and with some of the treatment, that's actually improved considerably.
The way was that tradition 4 autonomy is very strong within SLAA, that unless some meetings experiment, innovate and discover new ways to help sex and love addicts, will be stale and eventually irrelevant. So I want to personally thank you for the work that you do in innovating. It's extremely important to the fellowship as a whole. What are I know we can't break anyone else's anonymity, but just in general terms, what have been some of the promising outcomes and results for the members of the group?
Again, under the Our Stories section of the workshop, there's where people have given me permission to talk about their stories. And I've got 4 there, along with my own story. The spiritual leader in his 50s and a couple of guys in their 20s. And I'd say the most common thing with these guys is, and I'll talk about the 2 guys in their 20s, is both have been able to do sober dating for the first time in their life. One has been seeing this woman for 6 months and it's still not sexual. And it's just been this slowly developing relationship. And this is just totally new for him. It's always been sex within the first 24 hours. And so the ability to manage relationships is there's a neurological component to that. And for instance, I'm still in the midst of detoxing my brain. I've got heavy metals, mercury, aluminium, along with others. That's not a short process. Although I started some of the brain training stuff initially, I've only been in the detox phase 2.5 years, and they're talking 4 or 5 years to get the heavy metals out of the brain. It's a complex thing. And so for me, I like to give one key example of how that detox has helped me in a way that affects recovery. All my life, I've had trouble judging traffic, crossing roads. I gave up driving because it was all too hard. And then 6 months into detox, I found crossing roads became easier. I was judging it better. And it was like my auditory attention was picking up noise from the distance. I wasn't so hyper-focused on balance and coordination, just walking. I could actually walk towards the curb at the same time as picking up the visual and auditory signals that were coming from my left and my right. And I liken this to the recovery process, where if we're managing a temptation, we're picking up thoughts, emotions within ourselves from others and trying to process this all at once. And so recovery is like continually trying to cross roads. Life is like continually trying to cross roads. And so part of that detox, I always had trouble when I would mow the lawn. I'd get resentful and I had no idea why. And I lived in apartments for 10 years, so I didn't have to mow lawns. I moved here a few years ago. I started mowing lawns and the resentments were back when I was mowing the lawn. What's that about? It was about the fact that I had trouble paying attention and I was trying to make myself safe by producing adrenaline and other stuff in my brain. So the standard approach is, you just got to inventory. And I mean, the resentments were stuff I'd inventoried long ago. Like there were stories I didn't even believe, but once I started detoxing, I started noticing I'm not going to those resentments to mow the lawn because I can pay attention better.
Right. They say recovery is like peeling an onion. And this is a fascinating conversation. I'm also curious because we are, in SLAA, we've committed and celebrate diversity and inclusion. Are you seeing that all people are similar, or are you seeing that there are particular cohorts of addicts that can particularly benefit from looking at brain health?
Absolutely. I live in a lower latitude, so vitamin D, like in Canada, is an issue. And, vitamin D regulates a couple of thousand genes. It's no mistake that about a third of the members I work with on brain health issues are people of colour, and vitamin D has been a common theme, where some have been appallingly low when they've gotten tested. And there's just another guy getting tested at the moment who's totally committed to recovery but struggles, and done a lot of work. And he's just starting that physical journey. So that's very much part of it. The other thing I'm picking up is, and I'll put this out there bluntly, essentially at the moment, sexual and relationship recovery is an elite pursuit. The demographic in all of sexual recovery, from what I can see, is skewed, economically, socially, educationally, vocationally, towards the higher end. And that's because you've got poorer health issues, you're going to have a lower socioeconomic status. If you're struggling to put food on the table, and that's some of the guys I'm working with, you're not going to have the time, the energy, the brain power to commit to recovery. So
what do you think has been the most helpful thing that SLAA has been able to do for you in this journey? Could you have recovered without SLAA, I guess is the blunt question. Could you have just gone to the right brain health doctor and not have needed us?
I need my people. I need my community. And that's almost impossible to find anywhere else that tied in the sexual and relationship issues along with the health issues. So yeah, trying to get the combination. I mean, it's difficult enough talking about sexual and relationship recovery in program, let alone, in an ADD support group or there is some element of that going on, I've seen, but not to the sort of the depth where we're able to sort of put the whole package together.
Thank you. Some people would say certainly brain injury is very sad, but so is cancer. What's that got to do with sex and love addiction? How would brain health tie into sex and love addiction?
In general, you've got attention issues, you've got a much higher chance of any addiction. You've got a brain injury, you've got a much higher chance of any addiction. To say, it's not relevant just ignores the foundational principle from AA of what 12-step recovery is all about.
I mean, we're all very aware of the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, but maybe the HALTs, the S is sick.
Well,
the
point is the HALTs point towards the brain. That all happens within the brain. There's neurotransmitters, there's all sorts of, there's jumping to the survival brain that happens with the HALTs. So it's already in there. The anorexia recovery tools document beautifully points to a lot of this stuff. But that phrase HALT, it points directly towards the brain. And as I like to say, the AA Big Book mentions the word brain, but doesn't mention the word sponsor. In the original editions. And the word brain is in there in the early chapter, first chapter. From Dr. Silkworth, I want to quote, because I think this is actually quite profound, and this is actually from the AA grapevine on his death. And it really sums up, I think, the challenge for 12-step programs in moving from the programmatic towards the personal. And that is this obituary for Dr. Silkworth from the AA grapevine, and it's all in the workshop. Said he was the world's greatest practical authority on alcoholism. He was never in a hurry. He had no formulas, no stock answers. The unexpected was to be expected in alcoholism, and that he came to each new case with a wonderfully open mind. Not just do these three things for everyone. I say, yeah, you may need to do those three things, but you may need to do 50 things first. But we become reductionist. Yes, we become reductionist in the health field. We become reductionist in 12-step. Each new case with a wonderfully open mind.
Thank you. the purpose of this committee is to raise awareness of SLAA as as one of the tools for people treating sex and love addicts. Not the only tool, but one of the tools that they can recommend to raise awareness. So what would you say to therapists asking, should I send a client to SLAA?
I know some therapists do this already, but are they ready? Not, oh, we'll take any addict and, because that's our job. We're the experts. But a sense of humility and a sense of cooperation, and how, to listen to the therapist rather than just tell the therapist. To listen to the doctor rather than just tell the doctor. And so when you respect the professional, you'll get respect back. But if you're not respecting them, then, and just, we're the answer to addiction, which has become too much the mantra in 12-step programs, then I think we go a lot further.
And what would you say to, since it's our job to communicate with the treating industry, what are some of the key messages you think we could share?
And this will be news to some of the therapists, but I think increasingly the newer generation of therapists, from what I understand, understands the physical basis. They're understanding brain health a lot more. But that the key thing is that health is a foundational principle. That because, and I go into this in the workshop, because sexual addiction recovery deals with the instincts, that it requires a higher level of brain function than substance abuse. Because with substance abuse, the drug is out there. With an instinctive addiction like sex, food, or money, when you're dealing with an internal instinct, the old environment is inside our brain and body. And as one new member to our group said beautifully when I used that phrase, that our old environment is our brain and body, and he said, oh, well, that means I've got to change my brain and body.